Hi everybody, welcome to Nature Source Care. This is Dr. Fonda Goldman. Today I was going to talk to, I'm a naturopathic physician by the way, in case you don't know who I am. Today I was going to talk about homeopathy for hopelessness, specifically the Bach Flower Remedies, Gorse, and Wild Rose. Before we get too far along, please note the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that persist or worsen, please consult with a qualified medical professional. And it's always best to determine the root cause of any disease and to develop a comprehensive treatment plan so you can really get to the root of things. While homeopathy and Bach Flower Remedies can be very effective, they may not be appropriate for everybody, and they may not be effective as a single therapy. It might be best to combine it with other mental health modalities, such as talk therapy, for example. So just a couple words about Bach Flower Remedies generally. Bach Flower Remedies are a kind of homeopathy, and homeopathy is a type of energy medicine. So basically the idea of this paradigm is that states of health and disease and symptoms are all energy patterns. And so you can give energy medicines to shift energy patterns that relate to physical or mental or emotional states of dishealth or dis-ease to bring people back to balance. So that's the general idea. But if you're more interested in background and history, I would check out my first Bach Flower video on the Walnut Bach Flower Remedy. Okay. The general concept with the Bach Flower Remedies is that disease stems from an inner struggle. So what I found in my practice about Bach Flower Remedies can be very helpful and effective with mental, emotional, and spiritual issues that people are facing. If you're interested in this content generally, you might look at my homeopathy or Bach Flower Remedies playlist, because I always organize my videos into playlists so that they're easy to find. Well, let's start with the first remedy here, Gorse. And the reason why I'm talking about these two remedies together is that the general keynote symptom for both remedies is feeling hopeless, but there are nuanced differences, and that's true for all the Bach Flower Remedies and homeopathy in general. So the key with getting the best homeopathic remedy or Bach Flower Remedy is always in the nuances and details of a case or a situation. Yeah. So anyway, so Gorse feeling hopeless, but they're still at a point where they can be persuaded to try something even if they don't really believe it. Like, they might have friends or family who's like, why don't you try this now, And it might go along even if they're like, yeah, I don't know if it's going to work, but they'd still do it for the sake of other people. Yeah. So, so Gorse symptoms tend to come on after people have been suffering with quite a few setbacks for quite a long time. So this might be something like a chronic illness or other sort of chronic situation where people just can't seem to make any headway. Yeah. They may even be told by experts in whatever field, medical or otherwise, that there is no hope. And they just take that in and sort of give up their own authority, to try anything new or even have even a little bit of hope for the situation. And as I mentioned, they may try things mostly to appease other people, but they're not really convinced that there's any point or purpose or use to trying something new because they've faced so many disappointments before. And so this negative, but the thing, kind of the danger here is that this negative mindset gets reinforced. It's sort of the downward cycle or spin for the mind to, you don't try anything, you don't get better, you're still dealing with the negative situation, whatever it is, and, it just, you really don't have any hope at that point if you don't try of getting anywhere better. The other thing is that, again, this gets pretty deep into the person, and they start to internally withdraw from life. It's like, what's the hope? What's the point? What's the use? why bother? And then they just, I don't know, they, sometimes they even talk about sort of a Gorse picture of somebody where they just look kind of pasty, white, there's no real enthusiasm or color, they're not very animated, And this is also because they're not only distancing themselves from life, but they're distancing themselves from themselves. They're distancing from themselves, their own sort of inner fire, will to live their highest life, that sort of thing. And they're also distancing themselves from their soul's journey. So there's a lot of disconnection in this type of person when they reach this state. And so the thing is that the issue here is that basically they're rejecting the direction of their higher self to move through life and different circumstances and different experiences. And so when they're focused on, their current viewpoint of this is a negative situation, they're missing the opportunity to shift into a higher mode of perspective of why did this disease happen for me? What could be a higher purpose for it? What's my destiny in life? What's a higher perspective on the experiences I've had in life? And sometimes it all gets to be too much and too heavy, and they just can't, get their mind, to reach that level of, what's the point of all this? Yeah, it's just they can't reach it really. And they might even say things like, I've tried everything but, or what's the use? And, they would come across as being depressed or at least resigned. Because again, there's just their mind has sort of shut themselves off again from the evolution of life. That just natural flow of energy that supports all of us, the birds and the deer and us, the trees, the flowers, there's a certain sort of momentum, with life. So the risk here is that by being stuck in this state and not being open to trying anything new, they're basically impeding their personal growth and the opportunity to live at the highest level that they can. The potential outcome is if they take this remedy, is that they rediscover hope. They won't necessarily expect the impossible, but they'll come to believe that all will turn out well in the end. And they may continue to suffer, but again, depending on what the situation is, but it'll be without complaint. It'll be with a certain sort of deeper understanding that the situation may be tough. It may be even it may seem intractable, but there is a purpose to it. It's not just suffering for suffering's sake. And that they may even find that they learn the most from periods of suffering in their life, and they may come to instead start saying things like never say never. So the mental state and the openness to their circumstances and openness to learning from these circumstances to help develop the person, being, spirit, soul, even personality, that gets all back into play after taking a remedy like this. So that's Gorse. And then Wild Rose. So again, this is another experience where, somebody's feeling hopeless. But in this case, the person's even more withdrawn, even more shut down, and is not willing to try anything. They're just like, forget it. I'm done. I don't want to face disappointment, again. They may not even have those words to it, but they're not willing to try anything at all. Even with the support of other people, they're just like, nope, not doing it. So the inner state here is that what's the struggle for this person is that they're misunderstanding the concept of devotion and dedicating themselves to purpose, to their own purpose within the whole of humanity. That may seem like a lot, but let's talk about it a little bit. It may become a little bit more obvious what that is all about. But somebody in a wild rose state, I mean, because they're not trying anything at that point, they may seem lifeless or barely existing, miserable, definitely sad, apathetic, and this is even like far beyond depression. They may always be tired because it actually takes a lot of energy to like barricade yourself from life. The flow of life. They lack interest in things, motivation. They might always be bored or feel empty. And they just truly believe circumstances cannot be changed. They may have difficulty socializing because they're so distanced from their vital source. They wouldn't have much to talk about, because they, socializing, usually, there's some effort made in talking to people and sharing experiences, and they're like, yep, this is it. This is my experience. It sucks, and there's nothing else to say about it. So they may avoid social situations, actually. They may also kind of shift to becoming sort of a workaholic, but workaholic in a way where they're very much like a machine. Like they're just doing it to do it, doing it out of duty, but there's no joy, there's no expression of their spirit, of their will or anything. It's just, just something to keep busy, basically. And this set of symptoms can show up in somebody after, like, when they're really burnt out after a long period of overextending themselves, where they're just like, there's only so much, I can't keep this up, whatever I'm doing. So this situation can be temporary like that. It also might be chronic, where during childhood, a person may have had the experience where if they ask for help or support or something like that, people turn them down, maybe even ridiculed them, or there were strings attached. Like it wasn't just help or support was not freely given, unconditionally given. And so because they had negative experiences with asking for help, receiving help early on, then their mind creates this basically pattern of just, there's no use, right? So the risk here is that, somebody can be completely closed off from life and the changing cycles of life, because things go up, things go down, things do change. Even the, Stonehenge and things like that. I mean, these great stones and, mountains, I mean, they are actually changing. They may not look like it. It may be glacially slow, but actually everything is in flux. So the potential outcome for somebody who takes this remedy is that they become more flexible and open in their mind, and they're sort of released from this mental prison that their mind has created. They find interest, they find joy, they believe in possibilities, and they consciously work on improving their negative mental habits, and might even become a little bit enthusiastic. That was good. It sort of, again, brings them back in flow and back to life, back to themselves. So as I mentioned with homeopathy and Bach Flower Remedies, it's really figuring out which one is the best. It's all about nuances. And so you might consider other remedies if somebody seems like they're feeling hopeless. And I've made some other videos that may be helpful in discerning that. I have videos on Bach Flower Remedies, Cerato, and Larch. Cerato is for people who don't trust themselves, so they always end up, following other people's thoughts, opinions, suggestions because they don't trust themselves. So it's sort of a lack of confidence. Larch folks, when they're in that state, the reason why they don't try anything is because if they feel inferior. So you can see that, not having confidence in yourself, and that's why you're not doing things or trying new things or feeling inferior, like maybe you can't do it or you don't deserve to do it or deserve to be successful or whatever. Again, these are important and actually quite deep nuances. somebody in the wild rose state or the gorse state, it's really more not that they don't trust themselves, but it's like they don't trust life. Yeah, so it's that's pretty profound. I also have a video on Bach Flower Remedies for feeling overwhelmed, and I talked about 4 different remedies in that video: elm, hornbeam, oak, and olive. And elm, for example, is for temporary weakness of somebody who normally carries a lot of responsibility, and their issue is that they confuse their vocation with themselves. So there's sort of this, fuzzy boundaries in terms of supporting themselves beyond their vocation. Hornbeam is when people are mentally worn out, so maybe like students, at the end of the semester or something like that. That's more of a hornbeam situation. Oak is for people who just rigidly pursue goals, even if their heart, spirit, soul really is into it. It's like they're just like all about duty and commitment, but to the extent where like it's just they're doing things, but in a very dry way, because again, they're not doing it from an integrated self. Yeah, they just have in their mind, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get it done, but it's just their mind who's sort of overriding their natural signals and desires. Yeah. And then the other one in that video is olive, and that's for people who are exhausted on every level after long excessive strain. So that's why like you can kind of hear like this one too, like wild rose, for example, can also kind of come about from burnout from somebody who's overextended themselves. But again, the nuances and the deeper reasons for their actions needs to be sussed out. The other thing I wanted to mention, it's not related to homeopathy, but actually, you may know, I'm also a Vedic astrologer or Jyotishi. Vedic astrology comes from ancient India. It's over 5,000 years old. And there are different situations if you happen to know somebody's Vedic birth chart. Saturn, like these sorts of states of like gorse and wild rose, and being worn out and, negative mindset and everything. Usually those things have to do with Saturn, because the planet Saturn in Vedic astrology is about being, slow development, negativity, skepticism, anxiety, depression, like a lot of things that we're talking about here. So if somebody's going through a Saturn period, you go through, Vedic astrology, they determine different periods that people go through. Saturn, Mercury, Mars, whatever. So if people are going through a Saturn period, they may be more likely to end up in this type of state. Or if in their birth chart, Saturn is on the moon, conjoined with it or aspecting the moon, because Saturn is a very dry planet and the moon is full and juicy like the ocean. So when you have a dry planet on the moon, it's going to affect the mind, because moon represents the mind. So it's going to, this drying, slow, delayed, negative, skeptical, qualities are going to affect the mind. Also, from a Vedic astrology point of view, somebody might be going through Sati. So Sati is a 7.5-year period. It basically is when Saturn is shifting through the sky and basically in the sign before, the sign of, and the sign after the placement of the natal moon. So Saturn is the slowest planet in the sky, at least according to classical Vedic astrology, and it changes signs every 2.5 years. So Saturn is going through 3 signs, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, right before, of, and after the moon, 3 different signs. 2.5 by 3 is 7.5 years. And so Sati, this period again is called Sati. It's notorious, it's sort of a notorious period, like in India, when people hear, oh, you're going to go through Sati, like, they start ramping up their spiritual practices, because it comes with a lot of change, and it can be a really difficult period in people's lives, and they may just be like, what happened? Like everything in my life dried up or fell away or whatever. And that's not always the case. I actually became a Vedic astrologer during my sadhisati. But the thing is that if somebody's going through sadhisati, it may be increasingly challenging for people to shift into a more positive frame of mind, because again, Saturn, this dry, slow planet, is basically affecting the moon or their mind. The moon represents the mind. And it may not be only that they're going through sadhisati now, but if somebody grew up in sadhisati, so if during their childhood they were born into sadhisati, where Saturn was close to their moon, within the sign of their moon, early teenage years or whatever, I mean, that's 7.5 years during somebody's development. It's sort of like this learned helplessness, because they start to internalize, they start to think that 7.5 year period is them, instead of, again, just a cycle, whether you want to think about it from an astrological point of view or a biological point of view, in terms of like, biological and natural evolution of things. So there are other perspectives too, again, just to have different tools in the toolbox in terms of different ways to help somebody who's going through something like this. Yeah. So 2 more Bach Flower Remedies. I hope you found this helpful and useful, interesting. And I thank you for your time. Until the next one, take care.